Hello. I decided to make a little video for you to encourage you to start your assignment, which is the 5-paragraph essay. Yesterday night, I added something to the screen, to the module, first one, and that is examples of a good, I left out A, so I need to put that in, a good Machiavelli or Lao-tzu essay. So, oh no, I didn't leave it out. Examples of good Machiavelli or Lao-tzu essays. There's one of each. But before I go over that, let me point out some helpers, some things that I've added to the module. I mean, that they were there from the beginning. And that would be, I want to go over to the tips for editing. They will help you give feedback to other students, these tips for editing, and as well as know how to write an essay. Okay, so when you're writing, you're going to use third person. You may use first person because I like first person. First person is I and we, us, me. Okay, so it's singular or plural. I like it. A lot of English teachers like it, and they will use it. But some teachers won't. So you always have to ask your teacher whether first person is acceptable or not. When you're writing, there's some ways to strengthen. And that should be for a future, for a future video on style. But I will start giving it to you a little bit at a time. If you were to say Machiavelli was right, that's stronger than saying I think Machiavelli is right. So writing I think in front of a declarative sentence does not necessarily make that idea stronger. It actually weakens it unless you are a scholar on Machiavelli, and you've already established that for your credibility at the beginning of the essay. And most of us are not scholars on Machiavelli, although we know more about Machiavelli now than the average person, just having watched the video and having read the section of the Prince that is put into your book. So do not use you. Do not use the word you. I will edit it out and I will take off points if you use the word you. Don't use your, something like that. Don't use a citation in the introductory paragraph if you can avoid it. So unless the prompt is asking you to remark or respond, address a particular quotation, in which case you need to have it in the introductory paragraph, you will avoid using quotations until the first, second, or third body paragraph. You might even have one in the conclusion. I'm not saying it's forbidden. I'm just saying don't use it just to fill up the space, okay? And if we're talking about Machiavelli, or Lao-tzu for that matter, it's not a good time or place to be quoting other people. So when you're writing about a writer and you're supposed to address that writer's ideas, you only want to quote that writer. All right, going further. Tell the writer, when you're talking to other people, you will tell them what you like and which idea struck you as strong when you're editing for someone else. Let's see, do not use Wikipedia. There's a reason for that. Don't use it as a place to cite. That's why encyclopedias are also not used or encouraged for use in research papers, because they are themselves encyclopedias, and Wikipedia is a kind of encyclopedia that draw their material from primary sources. So we don't want to use a secondary or third tertiary source. We want to use a primary source. All right, when we have a citation and they do not give the entire web link, be sure the thesis statement addresses the prompt. Where am I? I'm sorry, I'm reading wrong. If you use a citation anywhere, do not give the entire web link. Okay, right? You're going to be using MLA format. Be sure the thesis statement addresses the prompt. If the thesis statement does not completely address the prompt, that is okay, so long as whatever is missing is addressed in a topic sentence of one of the body paragraphs. Do not use dropped quotations. Okay, so that is down here, what some of that means. And I will also point out what some of that means in the examples. So going way down to the bottom, if you watch this quote, this little tiny video, I try to get short ones so that they don't drive you insane. She talks about dropped quotations. A dropped quotation is when you use a quote, but you don't add any words of your own. And that could be as simple, words of your own could be as simple as Machiavelli writes. Those are words of your own. Machiavelli writes, or according to Machiavelli, comma, open quotation, say whatever he wrote, close it, and put the citation. Okay, so that's why I do want you to watch all of these little 3 videos. So a signal phrase would be something like this at the very bottom. Example, Sarah Smith, New York Times columnist and author of, quote, using signal phrases, end quote, explains, comma, open quotation mark, the best way to introduce a quote is to use a signal phrase, period, close quotation mark. That was a signal phrase. Okay, so you don't want to do that. And when I start talking about dropped quotes in my one-on-one commentaries, you will realize what I'm talking about. Okay, essay conclusions have some sort of epiphany. An epiphany is like an aha moment. You don't do what we were taught in high school, which is just say the same things all over again. No, that's not for college. Now you're becoming more sophisticated writers. You will want to articulate a thought that is an insight, either emotionally, intellectually, psychologically, or philosophically. So that's the kind of aha moment, and I'll give you an example as we move forward. I've done 7 minutes so far. Okay, transition statements are something that help us move from one paragraph to the next paragraph and help us move from one idea to the next idea so that it doesn't feel bumpy. If there's no transition, if you're talking about one thing and then you're suddenly talking about another thing, that means you did not use a transition. Okay, this breakdown at the bottom of the tips for editing talk about what is expected. You've got your introduction, the first body paragraph, second body paragraph, third body paragraph, and then the conclusion. Okay, it should have been 5, but it didn't want to be 5. All right, I am now going to move over to the example. Here in your module, I have added something that was on the announcement page, but here it's easier for you to get to it. Come on. Examples. Okay. They are, in fact, the same exact prompts that I've given to you this time. The first one is, by referring to current events and leaders, either local, national, or international, decide whether Machiavelli's advice to the prince is useful to the modern politician. Consider whether the advice is completely useless or completely reliable, or whether its value depends on specific conditions. First, state the advice, then show how it applies, or does not apply, to specific politicians, and finally, critique its general effectiveness. If you choose this prompt, and you're going to be using current events and leaders, I promise you that you will probably irritate somebody. And for the purposes of this class, we have to try not to be irritated and give feedback based on encouraging the writer to have support. So I personally don't mind where you lean, which direction, as long as you can support your thesis statement. Let's look at the student's essay. An example of a non-Machiavellian prince. The definition of a Machiavellian is one who is cunning, scheming, and unscrupulous, especially in politics or in advancing one's career. Okay? That's a hook. That's a really good hook. It gets straight to the point about what a Machiavellian is, and it engages our interest. So I want to keep reading. A hook is a sentence that will make you keep reading. Machiavelli was a realist, and realism is needed to be a good leader or prince. The writer in this case did not say "I think," which would have weakened it, and yet this is already a controversial statement. So what I'm waiting for as the reader and teacher to see if the writer supports this contention that Machiavelli was a realist. And realism is needed. That doesn't need as much argument for me that realism is needed. I would expect realism is needed in every walk of life, which is why I'm making an inspirational video for you discussing what you need, because I realized that you need some encouragement. A good leader or prince is someone who can keep his nation from danger and maintain the goodwill of the people. Okay, again, that's possibly debatable. However, I would say that's not going to be too hard to argue for, because yes, you do want to keep your nation from danger, otherwise you won't have a nation. Maintaining the goodwill of the people, yeah, they could overthrow you. A good leader would not be overthrown. Hey, he or she was reading my thoughts. Machiavelli explains how ruthless, cruel, and yet compassionate, moral, and loving a leader must be, or I might say seem, in order to be respected and stay in power. If the United States current President Trump had followed all these rules, he would not be under investigation by the FBI and not be hated by so many Americans. That is why he is not a good example of a Machiavellian prince, even if he gets the first qualification right, the military. Okay, so that sentence is the thesis statement, and you can see that it was written in 2018, so that's a year ago. And the timing was a little bit different. And I think that I'm going to have to stop at 15 minutes because it doesn't go past, so I'll have to do part 1 and part 2 for you. But so just to let you know. Okay, is it good? It's fine. It's exactly addresses the prompt. This is what the writer has decided to state, that he's not a good example of a Machiavellian, and that this contention is going to be supported, I expect, by the body paragraphs. Okay, and it followed very cleverly, very intelligently after a definition. Definition is one of the best ways to start an essay. So when in doubt, what do I say first? Define stuff, but don't use the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Define out of your own head. All right, first body paragraph, because this one was the introduction. President Trump does put military matters first. Okay, so that's where the writer already said that this is what he gets right, the military. He wants more money spent on branches of the military, whether it is for weapon development or maintenance. He recognizes the threat from North Korea and wants to always be prepared to fire right back. Machiavelli would approve of this, but also mentioned that without a respected reputation, a prince will never keep an army united and prepared for combat. If Trump were to follow Machiavelli's advice carefully, he would exercise his mind by, and the brackets mean that the author has, the student writer has modified the quote somewhat, so you are allowed to modify quotations by adding brackets and changing the verb form, for instance, which is what happens here. By reading histories and in them studying the deeds of great men, he must see how they conduct themselves in war, and he must examine the reasons for their victories and their defeats. Correctly cited, just the page, because we already know it's Machiavelli. Unfortunately, and there's only one citation at the end anyway, unfortunately, it is a well-known fact our leader lacks any reading or research of any matter. It is well known he does not like to read at all. In this he neglects to follow Machiavelli's advice, as on other important matters. Okay, I've got 1 minute and then I'll have to stop. All right, so the support for the first part is ongoing and good. When Machiavelli talks about those things for which a prince is praised or blamed, he suggests taking the middle road. He explains no one is 100% good. It's the reputation that matters. That's what he said. And if he wanted to strengthen this a little bit, he could have put in a quotation demonstrating that Machiavelli said that. A leader does not have to be good. He just must act that way or seem to be good, because if a leader is always good, he can be ruined. He can be ruined, period. It is necessary for a prince wishing to maintain his position to know how to do wrong and to make use of that decision according to necessity. I'm going to stop and start a new one.